Joining us now for more is Yaakov Lapin. He's a defense and military affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute in Rehovot. And Yaakov, let's take out a bit of a wider picture now. Of course, it looks like a successful operation today, but the situation remains very volatile and tense in the West Bank, including comments we just heard from a Palestinian official suggesting that not only is there perhaps not going to have security cooperation with the Palestinian security forces, but they could even become kind of an enemy force in the coming weeks.
I would view those comments as rearguard action by the Palestinian Authority against the battle of narratives that it is currently losing with Hamas. Hamas's message, that of so-called resistance, which is another way of saying unending war against Israel, is the dominant message. So even though many of the terrorists that we've seen active in the West Bank recently have acted without being part of a chain of command or a cell, they're acting under that general atmosphere. And the Palestinian Authority is quickly losing control. It has been doing so for the past year. And now it is basically desperately trying to regain some legitimacy. And those are the wider views that I would look at those comments through.
Right. Now, you say Palestinian Authority losing control is specifically in places, let us say, like the cities of Nablus and Jenin. It's suspected the Hawara killers maybe are just inside Nablus. Is the IDF going to have to potentially risk a major incursion into those cities, for example?
Well, the IDF has been conducting incursions into those cities every few nights, and without hesitation. What has been driving those operations has been very precise intelligence tip-offs from the Shin Bet, the Israel Security Agency. And once that intelligence comes in, the special forces go in. There's an inner perimeter, an outer perimeter, and we've seen no hesitation on the part of the defense establishment to recommend those operations, and on the part of the cabinet to approve them. And I have to say that this has been going on for a year, so the past government was approving exactly these kinds of operations as well. What has changed is the risk, the precipice that we seem to be approaching of a much broader security escalation in the West Bank, and that is something that the defense establishment is attempting to avoid. So it's playing this sort of balancing act, a very firm fist against terrorists on the one hand, while doing its best to leave Palestinian civilians out of this cycle of violence and terrorism. And that is the delicate and precise balancing act that the IDF is currently seeking to pursue.
Yeah, I think we saw that increased risk in the most recent Nablus operation, where the fatality rate and the number of wounded among Palestinians was quite higher. There's another element being added here, actions by Israeli settlers, vigilante actions, you could call them, such as we saw in Hawara. How much is that now an added complication for Israeli security forces?
It's a very significant added complication because, A, it increases the risk of counter-revenge operations on the part of Palestinians who may not until now have been involved in terrorism. And if they see those kinds of scenes playing out in Hawara, they could be encouraged to join. And that's exactly what the Israeli defense establishment wants to avoid. So from a security perspective, it is extremely harmful and dangerous, both for the security of Jews and Palestinians in that area. And also, you know, from a moral and ethical perspective, it is, of course, a stain to see those kinds of actions on the state of Israel. I think that's a consensus view across the whole of the defense establishment and far beyond in Israeli society. So both from an ethical and a security perspective, it's a double failure for Israel to see scenes like that play out.
Now, Yaakov, that summit in Aqaba on Sunday now seems like it was a couple of months ago, but it did have a purpose, which was try to reduce tensions heading into the Ramadan holiday month, the Muslim holiday of Ramadan, which traditionally has been a time of heightened tensions. How concerned should we be going into that period, especially if things start to focus more, as they tend to do then, in East Jerusalem, in sensitive areas like the Temple Mount El Aqsa Mosque compound?
Yeah, I would consider the coming month to be a minefield with lots of mines, and some of them have flags attached to them that are quite predictable. One is the Temple Mount. Any kind of incident there could spark a new wave of violence, a heightened and more intense wave of violence, and that's closely linked to the East Jerusalem arena, which is extremely sensitive. The second is the West Bank. We've already seen trigger events, and I think that we're not far away from the danger of one or two more trigger events like that, events like Hawara, events like a deadly Palestinian terrorist attack, from really bringing us into a third intifada scenario. And then we have the third mine, which is the Gaza Strip and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. While they would prefer to have the violence focused in the West Bank, they may feel the need to get involved if the flames become very high. So we have multiple mines that we need to look out for in the coming month, and it is going to be an extremely sensitive and dangerous period that will require careful navigation to avoid blowing up those so-called mines.
All right, Yaakov Lapin, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.